This video is not intended for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Valhalla, and welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief. I'm your host, Stone Loki, and with me tonight is the one, the only, the master of disaster, the doctor of destruction, writer, poet, Adega Outlaw. How are you doing tonight, brother?
I'm fired up. You know what? Sorry and apologies for this morning when we were in chat and people were saying hello and I didn't respond. I don't feel very well today. But you know what? I'm still fired up. This is the topic that I live and die for.
That's right. It's a topic a lot of people have lived and died for, and that is freedom. The price of that freedom, I know the saying eternal vigilance, but it's also the lives and deaths of the people that have fought for it. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. And we are in a time where not everyone understands that anymore. Not everyone appreciates that. And when you don't understand something, when you don't appreciate it, it holds absolutely no value to you. You don't understand what people have given up, what people have done, how they've sacrificed. And this goes all the way back to the original battle for this country. It goes to World War I. It goes to World War II. It goes to every war. What is that price of freedom? You know, we talk about freedom of speech, standing up, shield wall, standing side by side, giving our opinions, talking about the things we want to. That is a double-edged sword. And it always will be a double-edged sword. Because someone died. No matter where you are, someone died for your ability to speak your mind. If you don't have that ability, there's a fight coming. There always will be. And because you have that right, you can say a lot of screwed up things. You can call people names. You can claim that they are this, they are that, or they're is, or they're phobes, or they're whatever. But when it comes down to it, someone died to give you that right. And there are consequences for people's actions. There are consequences for things that people say. But the reason why we defend that right is because each and every one of us have been given a gift. A gift by the lowliest cook to a 5-star general and everyone in between. And that gift is freedom. That gift is our ability to speak our minds and not be thrown in prison for it. People can have a lot of screwed up ideas. They can say a lot of messed up things. And there are times when there are consequences. But they still have the freedom to say that. They still have the freedom to speak their minds. And it's not always appreciated. It's not always respected. Psychodorf 9, how many people have sacrificed their time, their youth, their health for these entitled twat waffles?
At 1765, I was doing a lot. I got hung up on doing this revolutionary history, not to distract at all from what Loki's saying, because it goes right along with it. The Stamp Act was put in, and to understand what the revolutionaries, the colonists, were going through, because they wanted to be part of England. We mentioned this last week. They were told by England, no, you cannot create your own steel. You have to buy from us. You can only forest in this local area. You can't go elsewhere. And with this Stamp Act, every article of legal paper, whether it comes from marriage or bill of sale, had to be replaced with our paper and with the stamp of the king on it. And you have to pay for all of that. Otherwise, all contracts are null and void. And the local parliament, one, their voices were shut off because they weren't allowed to vote like loyal English citizens. But now they had to pay an exorbitant amount in all goods and services and be restricted in what they could do. Kind of sounds a little familiar, twist things a little bit, but it's very similar to what's going on today. And during that debate, and this tells you again that what they're telling you about our founding fathers and this freedom stuff's a bunch of garbage, and we need to tear down these statues. A young man by the name of Patrick Henry, the youngest member of the House. I'm going to read from the old language, so if you hear some weird words, you'll understand. An uneducated mountaineer recently chosen to represent Louisiana County. It wasn't exact Louisiana County, but it was something else at the time. Waited for the older delegates to lead the Burgesses in opposition to Parliament. But the older members hesitated or went home. Offended at the lukewarmness, Henry, in his passionate way, snatched a blank leaf out of an old law book and hastily drew out a series of fiery resolutions declaring that the Virginians were Englishmen with English rights, meaning that all the stuff that the king, who was crazy, wanted to push upon them was in violation to their English rights. That the people of Great Britain had the exclusive privilege of voting their own taxes, and so did the Americans. That the colonists were not bound to yield obedience to any law imposing taxation on them, and that whomsoever said the contrary was an enemy to the country. The resolution, it went into a hot debate. Now, we're going to continue here in just a second. He was one of the youngest ones there, standing up to all these, we'll call them swamp, Democrat, Republican people that have been there much too long. A violent debate ensued in which the Patriots had the best of the argument, which we do now as well. And this is around the world. This isn't just here. It was a moment of intense interest. Two future presidents of the United States were in audience. Washington occupied the seat as a delegate, and Thomas Jefferson, a young collegian, stood just outside of the railing. The eloquence and audacity of Henry bore down all opposition. Tarquin and Caesar each had their Brutus, he said. Charles I had his Cornwall, and George III, and this is when the people started getting mad, the old folks, the old guard, the ones who tried to shut him down. Treason, shouted the speakers. Treason, treason, exclaimed the terrified loyalist, springing to their feet. And George III made profit by their example, Henry continued. And then added, as he took his seat, if that be treason, make the most of it. This was his life on the line, and he was a young man standing down all these old people, all the boomers, who tell you that it is better to obey than to be free. And the ones that tell you that these people in our history were cowards and didn't care about people, just their own personal wealth and what they can steal from other countries. It's a load of crap. These were our pioneers. These were our betters. And an uneducated man who could stand up with better eloquence than any of these people who are burning buildings because they don't have the education in their mind of what this country actually stands for, what any free country stands for. Why people around the world fight tooth and nail to get into these free countries, whether it be Europe or the United States, for the things that it represents, for what, like Loki said, generations of people stood up and fought for, bled for, and died for. This is our heritage. It's not the heritage, like I said, of one country. It's the heritage of all humanity.
We won't kneel. Nor should we. Any of us. Because if we did, it would be a slap in the face to everyone that came before us. That fought, that died, that lived, that tried to make it better.
Evil tends to be sneaky in that regard. They let you have a moment of peace, a bit of quiet here and there. In the past couple of years, it was, yeah, well, we'll let them prosper a little bit, but now they're going to start monkeying with the way we cheat elections. So in order to stop that, we got to scare people into their little corners where they put on their masks. And you know what? If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. I know the science. Shouldn't be afraid of anything. But they tell you to be afraid so they can control you. And when I've been going through this, the parallels of what we are going through is so obvious. You know, they gave them a reprieve from the Stamp Act back in the Revolution, and the people celebrated thinking they had won. When they turned around in just another year, they put on a tax on all their glass, their paper, the paint, and including the tea. I know we know where that led to.
Yeah, a tea party.
Well, before even that, the people said, well, screw you, we're just not going to buy it. And they didn't. They started buying their own. It started to mold and rot in England. They shipped it here anyway. And the last boats that came in, you know, they claimed it was a mark of racism that they put on these Indian clothes and went and got on the ships and tossed the tea. It was a sign of free spirit. It was a sign of an indomitable race, an indomitable belief in freedom. When young men and women volunteered to defend the Union in the Civil War, it ended up with 600,000 lives spent for a free nation. During World War II, Winston Churchill got up and said, and guess who his mom was? She was an American. I can't remember exactly what they called them, but they were brides sent to help out the British, and she was an American-born patriot. But he said, never, never, never give up. And they try and silence that. And then I learned about this yesterday. My wife had been telling me about it. You wouldn't believe how many women died in World War II who were supporting the men. They were called the WASPs. Out of 230,000 women, 1% passed. They went through the exact same training as the American pilots. And they learned to fly. The difference between them and the men pilots were they learned to fly everything. From the big bombers to the little fighters. And they took these Corsairs and Stratofortresses and delivered them for the war effort. And many of them died. Because the planes weren't built well, the canopies would fly off. They weren't secured right. And yet they did it anyway because they were fighting for freedom.
Women's auxiliary service pilots.
Yeah. They were heroes. You know, that blood burns bright in everyone who has an education. That's why I put that quote very, very early on. The ones who are fighting against it now are, you have two choices to choose from of why they're fighting against it, why they're burning buildings, why they're tearing down statues, why they're using masks, both in what they say they represent and to cover their identity. You have two choices. There are the evil who hide behind all these frontline people. And all those frontline people are the ignorant who don't know. That lets you know what the true enemy of freedom is. It isn't the face next door, though they may yell names at you and call you ists or phobes or this or that or the other. It's the blind obedience to stupidity and ignorance. It's what's being taught in our schools and our colleges and broadcast through our music and our movies. And the whole reason why there is a Comicsgate, there's a whole reason why there's a Phantom Menace, the whole reason why there are the Sons of Liberty, the Daughters of the Revolution, is because they're fighting against ignorance. The ignorance that prevents people from being happy. The ignorance that helps people live on blissful lives that lead them down into destruction. You know, we say we do not kneel. I could show you images of millions of men on their knees. They're called the Uyghur. They're in China right now, where they have their heads shaven with their hands and their feet shackled, being put on trains off to camps where their organs are harvested while they're alive and awake. And their women are sold off as brides to Chinese dignitaries, where over 1.2 million Tibetans died for no reason except for being a peaceful people. And those soldiers that come in and do this, do it for fear and ignorance. We don't kneel. Otherwise, you'll see what happens. You kneel, they want you to prostrate. You prostrate, they cut off your head. Freedom doesn't kneel, except to take aim at the enemy.
Like your avatar.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why it's there.
Do you think that is the end goal here? That we kneel, that we prostrate, that we accept whatever rule, regulation they have for us without thinking twice about it?
That answer is pretty obvious, I would think. You know? Only buy on the day they want you to buy. It's been repeated over and over again. You are the second class. You are not royalty. You are not part of the party. You have a star on your shoulder. You can only do what we say for you to do, while the rest of us feed off the fat of the land. You will slave for us.
Derek McManus says, Chinese government is not a nice organization, oppressing their own citizens and actively carving out Lemsrum? Is that how you say that?
The Benzrium in Africa.
The Benzrium. Very rarely do I come up against a word I do not know. The Benzrium.
I'm going to read a little bit of what the French thought about Franklin. Again, the reason why I keep bringing these up is because it's what I've been studying over the past 2 weeks. Stuff that you don't normally hear. When crap started really hitting the fan and the colonists were struggling, Ben Franklin was in France looking for help because he knew that France and England weren't getting along very well. And Canada was seceded to Great Britain for the simple fact that they thought if we give them that will fire up the colonists to rebel. They were very smart when they did that. They knew how to play. There's good blood in France. And here we go from the book again. We'll see if I can read it properly. Now it was that genius of Dr. Franklin, shone with a particular luster. Of course, there's some words that don't mean the same as they do now. At the gay court of Louis VI, he stood as the representative of his country. No nation ever had an ambassador of greater wisdom and sagacity. His reputation for learning had preceded him. The dignity of his demeanor and the simplicity of his manners added to his fame. He goes on and on and on, but people don't really realize what happened with Ben Franklin. They think they're telling you now that he was this and he was that. When he was young, let's see. He was born Boston, 17th January 1706. His father was a manufacturer of soap and candles. To this humble vocation, the young Benjamin was devoted by his parents. Like I said, it's weird the way they write things back then, and I'm trying to interpret it. But the walls of the candle shop were too narrow for his aspiring genius. At the age of 12, he was apprenticed to his brother to learn the art of printing. But the brother beat him, and he ran off to New York. 12 years old, he ran off on his own. Silver spoon in his mouth? I don't think so. There he found no employment. In 1723, he's 17 years old here. He repaired to Philadelphia, entered a printing office, and rose in distinction. He visited England, returned and founded the first circulatory library in America, became a man of science, edited Poor Richard's Almanac, originated the American Philosophical Society, discovered the identity of electricity and lightning, made himself known in both hemispheres, espoused the cause of the patriot, and devoted the unimpaired energies of his old age to the perfecting the American Union. The name of Franklin is one of the brightest in the history of any nation. You don't get that in college anymore. You don't get taught that he stood on his own feet. He didn't stand on the necks of anyone else. He made himself at the age of 12 by running away from a beating and making something of his future. And then when he became old, at 72, he was in France and signed a treaty with France that guaranteed that the Patriots would gain the ammo, the food and weapons that they needed, plus ships that eventually were there to bottle up Cornwallis as they were retreating from Washington's army. That was given a heads up, like I told you, by this black spy. These were not the cowards that they're being taught to. Again, it's the ignorance that gives us the falsehoods of a bad history. But the blood of millions should tell you otherwise. My wife, on her side of the family, we visited there many years ago, went to look up some of the genealogy of her family, and found his tombstone, a great uncle or grandfather, I can't remember which. And we were very fortunate when we found it. We had to go by a marker because the tombstone itself was so old that you couldn't read it. And I took a picture of it, just as a historical thing. I'll get to him in just a second, but there are miracles that happen every day. So when I developed that film, because it was done on the old 35 millimeter stuff, you could read the tombstone bright as day when you're right there and you couldn't touch it. But the film itself showed it bright exactly who he was. And from that tombstone, we found out that during the Civil War, he was a mercenary and volunteered 3 times to serve the North. Most men only went once and were terrified to go back. These are the people that we need to be looking up to instead of trying to hide who they were. Instead of listening to people that come from China, get paid high amounts of money and to be college professors and lie to our kids. Or be part of the news agencies that's controlled by 6 companies, which is also paid for by only 3 families, and I could name those families, who lie about things, trying to set up a union in Europe to make everyone bend a knee to an unelected group of officials. It's amazing when you shine the light in the dark corners how that darkness goes away.
And Marx says, because people are sheep and will give up any freedom they have for a very false sense of security.
I say 4% of the people are probably like that. The rest of them just don't know any better. There are those people who would rather have someone else take care of them and they can be their little sheep, but realizing if someone else is taking care of them, there has to be production done. And if these people who are sheeple like other people to work for them, like to get on welfare, like to do other things, that means the other people have to work twice as hard. And those other people that are working twice as hard are eventually going to wake up and say, why am I working so hard when everybody else can be relaxing and maybe you're not wealthy, but you don't have to work. Well, then after that, those people give up. And eventually that government who's giving you the welfare, giving you the housing, will have to beat down upon you to force you into the labor camps because no one else is going to work. And that's when the death tolls start to rise.
And Chef Zilla just tipped a $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Chef Zilla. You get to do it with me, brother.
Let's do it.
Skull!
There it is! You confused? Take your hat off, boy. That's a $1 bill.
And Chef Zilla says, nothing touches my heart more than talking about the history of this country. May we become the bright, shining city on the hill. Thank you so very much, Chef.
Well, that's
Right.
the thing I want to. I try and emphasize this because in the Declaration of Independence, it says, according to the language of their time, you got to remember they weren't misogynists. They were using the language of their time, that all men, and in their understanding, all men meant all humans were created equal, that everyone has the same God-given rights. And when we talk about these, they're meant for everyone, everywhere. And the examples that we get from here, or the examples we get from anywhere, it doesn't matter which freedom fighter, true freedom fighter, not these guys that say Mao was a freedom fighter, or Che Juarez. I could hardly spit the man's name out. They were not fighting for anything except for their own domination of others. Truth is, if you're willing to lay down your life for somebody else, you're fighting for a good cause. You're fighting for freedom. If you're willing to lay down somebody else's, you're a monster. Sometimes you have to. There was a story, and I'm sure our fellows from across the pond would know how this story goes better than I. I don't even remember the city, so poorly is my memory, but the Allies had broken the codes of the Axis fairly quickly, and they had to hide that fact. Otherwise, there would be difficulties piled upon them and more deaths. And there was a city that Churchill was alerted to that was going to be bombed. And he had the choice: evacuate the city, which would alert the enemy that they had broken the code, or let the city be bombed in order to save the thousands more. Coventry, that's right. Winston Churchill was placed between the scales, and on one end was tens of thousands of people, the other one was thousands of people. And when the scales came into balance, it didn't matter what his heart said, it didn't matter what his own needs said, it mattered what the thousands of people that were going to die and that were going to live. It mattered. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And sometimes that's the hard reality of freedom. And yet he made the hard choice. And in the long run, it was the right choice. But a good person probably wouldn't sleep well for the rest of their life.
No.
Even though it was the right choice.
Did you ever learn about something that happened in World War II called Nayai?
I don't recall it by name.
It was a project that the U.S. government had, and they were American Indian code talkers.
Yes. I even know one of them, or I did. He passed away.
So did I. And basically, the U.S. government realized that no one in the rest of the world knew this language. And the American Indians that volunteered to be in the service, that volunteered to be their code talkers, were suddenly working with a government that almost wiped them out. Why would they do that? Why would they work with a government that could have systematically killed every single American Indian in the world?
Well, some of the old folks knew a little bit better. Nowadays, they're taught different. I remember when I was going to school, they found out I was half native, and they said, "Oh, we're going to take you to this special class. You're special. You're not like the rest of them." They pulled me out and they put me in front of a TV and thought that's how I was going to get my education the rest of the day. And after a couple hours of that, I said, "Where's the teacher? Where's this?" And they said, "Well, you're special. It's okay. You could get this." And I said, "Put me back in a class. I got to do work." These old guys, they learned lessons from even older people, that they understood that Native Americans are warriors, always have been warriors. They conquered each other. They wiped out each other. There's many tribes that have come and gone. And it was just how things were. A lot of the tribes, the vast majority of them, especially in the East, did not die as is being taught. The colonists saw, hey, wait, they converted to Christianity. And the natives said, ooh, these people are good looking. And most of them all intermarried within a short couple of generations. Had nothing to do with war. Had nothing to do with conquest. When we got in, certain group of politicians, which still exist today, which in the past used to put on white hoods, they were the ones who drove and hated. They are still the ones that are driving and hated. If you look at the groups that are setting fires now, the majority of them are liars wearing white hoods. Only they paint them black now to try and hide their true identity. So these code talkers, at least the one I knew, told me this. And he said, yeah, there's some horrible people. They came in, they stole our kids, they stole our women, they tried to teach us other things. But what the nation stands for is the same freedom that my grandfather wanted for his people. What's written in the sacred papers, as he called it, of the Constitution, is worth fighting for. And so he put on his uniform and he did his code talking, and he almost starved to death. I think I told you guys about the story when he said he was the one who thought he invented sushi because a bomb went off near where they were starving, eating their shoe leather, and some fish floated up to the surface of a little pond that was by them, and they ate the fish raw. And he says, those Japanese stole our idea.
I love that.
But yeah, that's why they went, because they knew what he called the sacred documents were all about. It wasn't about land. It was about the identity of a human.
And Positive Candor says, if we allow our liberties to be taken away, we will have only our vanity to wallow in. And Chef, don't apologize for that. Never apologize for that. Don't apologize for quoting that.
I heard a statistic recently. I listened to a news broadcaster. He's more of a commentator than anything else, and he's center left, which, I listen to pretty much everybody unless they're insane. Because if you don't, then you become ignorant on pretty much everything except for the insane. Tim Pool, some of you probably listened to him. And one of the wiser things that he says, and this is coming from someone who's center left, he gave a statistic where it showed that the people in the more the center and the right and even some on the left are afraid to speak their minds, and the only ones who aren't afraid to speak are the very far left communists, the one wearing the black masks and the ones burning buildings. That should fear you more than anything, that you're afraid to speak. That should be the greatest dread, is that you don't put out your flag, you don't stand up, that you allow someone else to tell you what to think and what to say. So, Chef, don't apologize. Get on your roof and yell it.
Get on your roof and yell it. Speaking about what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, I know we're not talking comic books here, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but just a few days ago, a certain Batman aficionado named Tom King called out a artist for doing a cover for Cyberfrog. And how ashamed he should be that he would be a part of something. He would be a part of this group. He would be a part of Comicsgate. Don't you know? I called him and I explained it to him. And the response was deafening. And Tom King had to come back and say, well, if there was an apology that needs to be made, I'll make it to him. I'm not going to make it to anybody else. I'll say it to him. I won't say it to anybody else. Because he was not expecting someone to stand up and say, hell no, you're not going to do that to me. Hell no, you're not going to shame me into compliance. Because that is what's happening. People are being shamed. They're having their fingers pointed at them, not just us. People's livelihoods are being threatened just because they don't follow their rule book. And their rule book is fucking toilet paper. That's all it's good for. That is all that paper that they have wrote all these 21,000 rules on that you have to follow. It's toilet paper. No one has to follow that. No one needs to follow that. Because there are things in place that say we have the freedom of speech. We have the freedom to choose. And every single man and woman that had died defending that is being slapped in the face by these people. That's why they want to tear statues down. That's why they want to burn landmarks. That's why they want to destroy Rushmore. Because they don't want you to know what any of these people died for. And that's for each and every one of us. They gave us the opportunity to live in a free society. Every single person, like I said, that has joined the service from the lowliest cook to the highest 5-star general chose to defend that. And they cannot attack that directly. They can't. Because they will get shut down. What they can do is say, here is a new rule book with 21,000 rules. And one of those rules is to get down on your knees and beg to be a part of something. If you're a good little boy or a good little girl and you follow all of these rules, publicly, publicly, we'll leave you alone for now. That doesn't mean they're not going to come after you later and destroy you. Just like they've destroyed a lot of people already. When a person can have a finger pointed at them and said, this person should be ashamed, and you're run out of your job, you're run out of your home, you're run out of your family, you're run out of your group, you're run out of your friendships. That's wrong. That's everything against what we are standing up for.
Positive Candor put in there this thing about 1984, but it's not. Because in 1984, we may see a lot of similarities, but those people were sitting down for the most part. In 1735 is when the rebellion really started to set in. That was 45 years before the freedom was wrong. With us standing up and refusing to kneel, with the elections across the world, with people waking up, it's already started and it hasn't been 20 years. They've been slowly trying to build, thinking they can sneak it in, unlike they ever did before. But every one of you are awake, and there's millions more out there. And Loki mentioned those rules that were written by Tom King and his ilk. I hate to say that because that's my name. That's why I go by Adega, because too many of those names out there, and I don't want to just fit in with all the rest of them. When someone raises their hand and says Tom, and there's like 20 others of them out there, I prefer to have a uniqueness to myself. But with all of those rules, this goes back to what we were talking about before, because it is identical. And you got to learn your history. When that Stamp Act came out with all those papers that had to put all the documents on that the people of the colonists had to sign, tons of this stuff came in on 5 ships. When all was said and done, when they started taking them out of all the buildings and burning them and basically using them as toilet paper, the records show that there wasn't enough to even keep for historical records. These people, their voices should be heard, but they should also be completely ignored. They can make their rules, but which one of you is going to stand by them? Are you going to be shamed to do what's right? I don't think so. Are you going to be afraid to stand with good people? You're here, aren't you? I don't think so. I think that you will stand in the right corners. You will stand on the higher mountains. You will raise your voices when you need to and when it's appropriate. And when it's not appropriate, you're still going to raise your voice, because you know what? You got one. You got the freedom to use it. Never kneel. Never be silent. And never be afraid.
And Cap, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. And Echo Base, greetings. They will keep this up until this is done, and even after it's done, it will try and come back. It's not honest. It's not true. It's not honorable. They aren't trying to help anyone. If any of you all saw the latest Amber Heard, Johnny Depp courthouse drama, You know exactly what I'm talking about. All she is doing is using a movement to try and end someone. People are being tried in the court of public opinion. Is another law that has been violated and broke up into a million little rules that you have to follow. And even then, they can change those rules at any time to suit their needs and their wants. That's not freedom. That is oppression.
Colin P. Smith asked a question, and you're right, it is oppression, but he said, with the revolution, if they got the representation in the British Parliament that they thought they deserved, would the Revolutionary War have happened? And I say, yes, it would have. There was a young Samuel Adams, I have his quote here, who in his journal said that the spark of freedom, which didn't exist in British Parliament like it does here, and they had a king who was half crazy, who didn't care about human rights. He said, in 50 years, was it 50 years? Might have been it was 100 years. In 100 years, all of Europe would not be as powerful as the Americans. They knew what was coming, and they prophesied that it would happen, and it did. Exactly as he said. It had more to do with the dignity of the human being than it did with Parliament, although part of gaining their dignity and their voice was to be part of Parliament. The greater was that every individual could pursue life, liberty, and originally it was property, but they changed it to the pursuit of happiness because there were some slavers and they didn't want to give any slaver any fuel. They were against slavery even then, contrary to what you're being told. So that life, liberty, and property was changed to life, liberty, and not guaranteed happiness, but the pursuit of happiness, meaning that if you worked for it, nothing would be in your way, and you can have what you want. You could be what you want. And you have a country that would back up those God-given rights, those inalienable rights, the freedom to defend yourself against invaders, whether it be on your property, in your car, towards your family. You didn't have to house foreigners and feed them and give up your clothes and your food so that they can march on to the next town and leave you destitute or stabbed and wrung through with a bayonet as they scalped and murdered many of the colonists. You guys probably didn't know, some of you, that there was a scorched earth policy set in by the British Parliament that didn't matter the town, didn't matter the size of the group or the people. They were told to go through and scalp them and wipe them out. Where do you think the Native Americans learned it from?
I'm going to quote something here straight out of Congress on July 4th in 1776. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. It's right there. It's right there. Everything is right there. All of it. And I'll swing back into the problem going on right now with comics as an example. These people want to point their fingers at others and say they are this, they're that, they're whatever. These are the same people that are burning down their own businesses because they do not want talent. They don't want talent. They want the illusion of diversity. They want the illusion that they look the part, but they aren't the part. When you're making something, when you're creating something, and you need more than just yourself, you don't go around saying, I need one of this person, one of this person, one of this person, one of this person, one of this person. You want the best person for the job, no matter what they are, who they are, where they came from, what they worship, what they believe. You just want the best person for the job. So you can either hire the talent that you need, whomever that may be, or you can hire someone that looks like something. I don't know what you guys would do, but I know that I would want the best person for the job. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter what they talk like, doesn't matter what religion they believe, doesn't matter whether they believe in religion or not. It's the best person for the job. And we can either get back to that and work at being the best we can be, or we can give it all up to look like something.
Someone asked me not long ago in one of these interviews when someone wanted to pick my brain, what books do I read and why? And obviously you get some of it here. But this goes for any endeavor like Loki's mentioning. You want the best. The reason being is if you hire the mediocre, then the next generation will only see mediocre and think that's excellence. And they will do as their predecessors, hire mediocre for the time, which for us would be idiocracy. And it would be a downward spiral of loss of beauty, of loss of ingenuity, of loss of art and music, until everything is just a fraction of what it could be. Where if you hire excellence, whether it be, like I said, in art, in writing, in comics, in engineering, in manufacturing, and going to the stars, if you hire that excellence, each successive generation, for those that have the fire that's instilled in them, will want to do better and make it more glorious, and bring about, I really mean this word in every sense of the form, except for physical, and evolution, to where our society evolves into something far greater than we can even imagine now. We've been given a gift. It's been fought for by the best of blood, men, women, and children. It has been orated about, and there are those who don't like it, simply because the reach is a little bit too far for them, and it makes them feel insecure because they can't reach it. And since they can't reach it, none of you can, and you all have to get in lockstep behind us because we're frail. And we need voices from all sides, except ours is the leader voice. So get behind us, otherwise you're an hysterophobe. Instead of saying, that person who lives in the big house, who has the nice cars, has made cars better. Or that person down the street who lives in the best of yards has made science that much better. Or the person down the street who has a big family, has children that are solving the medical issues of the time. And we should celebrate that instead of saying, wait, they're of the wrong color. We shouldn't listen to them, which loses all of the accomplishments simply because of an ist or a phobe paranoia, or someone wanting to subjugate and dominate the genius that is throughout all of humanity. Never kneel, never be silent, and never give in to these cowards.
Never.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification